In this video, we'll be talking about methods. In our previous video, we explained that this was like a verb. It's an action that can be done by an object or an action that can be done on an object. We'll also be covering worksheet functions, which is kind of like a method but executed at the application level. And again, whenever I talk about application, I'm talking about Excel as an application. However, you could also apply many of these concepts to Microsoft Word, Outlook, or any other Microsoft application. Let's begin.
If you want to follow along with this specific worksheet, then go to thatsobasic.com, go to the Intro to VBA video list, and you can download the specific file that actually goes with this video. First, we'll talk about application methods. Application methods are executed at the Excel application level, so it's not a specific object like a worksheet or a workbook or a range, but there's all these really powerful worksheet functions that allow you to do various mathematical operations and other kinds of cool functions. So if I was to type application dot worksheet function dot, and then I can see all kinds of options here. I can go through it alphabetically, or I can type something out like standard deviation, and then I get stdev. I can type out minimum to see how to get a minimum list of numbers. I can type max. Let's go ahead and use max as an example. I can type out my arguments like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will give me the maximum of that set of 4 numbers. However, I can't just let that result go nowhere, right? What comes out of this is a number. And so I'm going to assign that to a variable by typing result equals. And it's probably smart for me to give my results a variable type. So if I type dim results as long, let's say that I'm working with whole numbers, then that might make sense. Maybe I could type double, then that would give me the ability to work with numbers that have a decimal point. And what if I don't actually understand what's being asked of me? In this case, right? If I was just to type out max and then I see this and it says argument 1, 2, 3, and I have really no idea what this is, I can put my cursor over the word for the function and then click F1 on my keyboard. And what that's going to bring up is a Microsoft help topic. Microsoft help topics are really cool because they actually explain the arguments and the syntax for you. So here it's going to say arguments number 1 through 30. And then is it required or optional? So it's saying, well, this is a required input. What are we trying to find the maximum of? And then next is the data type. A variant means that it could be defined however you want. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be a range. And so let's talk about what would it look like if I was to put a range into here. That's not my workbook. Let's go to here. I've created a sample range in C2 to C65. And what I've kind of put down here in row 47 is the number 67 to kind of demonstrate to you that it's going to pull up that as the maximum number. And again, I don't have to capitalize or be case sensitive about range specific typing. I tend to just use lowercase. It's really up to you. If you want to use uppercase, you are welcome to. Hit F8 and run through, and you will see that result is now number 67. It evaluated this range and executed this function maximum and found the result and assigned it to this double variable that we created. Now hit stop. And let's go down and let's talk about workbook methods. Now, if you'll recall, the workbooks collection is essentially all of the workbooks. It's the collective concept of workbooks in general. It's not a specific workbook, so it's something that's done at the general level. Whereas if I was to specifically refer to a singular workbook object, then the methods that are available would be different. So one of the methods that I really love that's available at the workbook collection level, workbooks, is .open. If I type the dot, I can immediately see, just like with the application functions, all of the available things that I can do. It's not a really huge list. As you can see, I went through it pretty quickly, but .open is very helpful. Now, how I type my syntax it can get a little picky sometimes, because if I want to simultaneously assign the resulting workbook to an object variable, then I need to type it a specific way. And by specific way, I mean that I'm going to type a parentheses, and then I'm going to type file name, colon equals, and then my file path. So for the sake of our example, let's go get a file path. If you need to, go ahead and create another workbook, save it in a location, and get the file path for that workbook now. Feel free to pause the video at any point if you need to. So I just went to a workbook that I had saved down, and I went to the File tab, and I'm going to click on the workbook file path right here and click Copy Path to Clipboard. If you have an older version of Excel, you're just going to manually select this file path and copy it. Now I'm going to close the parentheses. When I put a parentheses at the end of the method, then that means that I'm done passing arguments into it. And I just got, let's repeat that error really quick. It says expected equal sign. The expected equal sign, that compile error is saying that, well, the way that you wrote this method, I think that you're trying to assign the output object to a variable. So what variable would you like to assign to? I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to type set wb equals workbooks.open, and then the rest of my arguments. Let's go ahead and define this variable, because whenever we're working with objects, we should probably say what kind of object it is. So dim wb as workbook. Now, if I want to run this, I'm getting some kind of a little disagreement here with Excel. It's saying breakpoint not allowed, and I think we're good. Okay, so initially WB is nothing, and for the sake of letting something happen, we should close the workbook that we're trying to open. Otherwise, it's not very exciting to try and open something that is already open, right? So now my workbook has been reopened and I can see it. So let's talk about two other syntax methods that we can use if we don't want to worry about trying to make the object assignment at the same time, because really you do have some other available options as to how to go about this. So for the sake of being able to see more of my code at once, and I recommend this is a good practice, is to replace your file paths that are very lengthy and verbose with a variable assignment. And notice that I'm not going to use set at the beginning. When we're working with data types, so in this case a string, I don't use set to make the assignment. When I was working with an object, I always start the assignment with the word set. So we can define fpath as string. All right, so this is example 1 with an object assignment. And we're executing the open method. Okay, now we're going to do it without an object assignment. So this is example 2. So we're just going to type workbooks.open, and then I can just type file name colon equals fpath. And then my third example is going to be it's the same concept. We're also going to open a workbook without an object assignment, and we are going to just use a slightly different syntax. And this is really meant to give you a feel for all of your options, so that as you kind of go through working with methods, you can find whatever style works best for you. I can tell you that I'm going to switch between all 3 depending on what I'm doing. So you might want to come back to this video and watch it again. And so what you'll notice here is I just assigned the very first variable here, right? And so let's say that there's a password on the workbook that we're trying to open, right? And I want to make this assignment. As soon as I typed a comma here, it said, okay, well, you assigned file name as one of the arguments that goes into executing this method. But what about updating links? Do you want to update links when your workbook opens? And so if I type a comma, it's going to skip that argument. And let's notice, let's just take note really quick with this little helper that we have right here. Update links was in a bracket. That meant that it was an optional argument. And then you see file name is string. This was not in a bracket, meaning that this is absolutely a required part of executing this method. So I can pretty much just do comma, 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 and just go right past all of these methods and say, yeah, just skip them all. But if I want to backspace past the commas, whatever is bold at a given moment is the argument that I'm assigning at that moment. So here I can say, okay, well, let's say my password is password, just for kicks. So for some reason, once I've entered in this optional argument for password, once I hit update, I get this expected equal parameter. But let's say I was to backtrack and just simplify this argument. Suddenly I'm not getting that error. And it's saying, yeah, absolutely, you can execute the open method without assigning to an object. So I'm not exactly sure who at Microsoft decided to make that distinction that once you start using this syntax, where I'm just separating the arguments by commas, and I'm not using the colon equals, that for some reason, once you start to use all of these optional arguments, you actually do have to start making an object assignment. So for that reason, I I wanted to show you this really quick, but to also emphasize that I don't use this method, um, not very much. So what I'm going to emphasize here are these two methods is that I can enter as many of the optional arguments here, and I will never be required to make an object assignment if I simply stick to the syntax of typing password colon equals, and then now you see that the bracketed optional argument is available to me. I didn't use the redundant commas, but I identified which argument that I'm trying to interact with by actually typing out the name within the bracket, followed by a colon sign, then an equal sign, and then the resulting whatever was being asked by that argument. Now, I could see where this would get confusing because you can see all of these arguments and you're thinking, well, what does it mean? What is read only? What is format? And what kind of things can I assign right there? And so I'll show you that both of these work by running through it. Either of them would have executed and opened the workbook at the file path that I've designated, right? But let's hit stop and let's understand the method a little bit more. Place your cursor on open and then type F1 on your keyboard again to access the VBA help topic related to this method. Okay, so now you see that this looks a little bit like the help topic that we looked at before for the application.worksheet function when we were looking at the maximum. So I've got everything kind of blown up a little bit. So let's make it a little smaller. And you can see that you could just tumble down the rabbit hole trying to understand all of the different arguments relating to this method. But what I want you to walk away with is that it shows you here whether or not it's optional, and then it also shows you how to understand the descriptions here. So if I wanted to, I don't know, let's say read only, it says true to open the workbook in read-only mode. So that means that it's a true false kind of answer. So if I wanted to go back and then type comma read only colon equals, I'm going to immediately see read only gets highlighted here, and then I can type true, and then it's going to open read only true. But what else is really interesting is that I can do things sort of out of order. So I can type comma, comma, and then read only colon equals true. And you see that password was an argument that came after read only. And so I really just sort of made decisions as I went along, like, oh yeah, there's a password on my workbook, so I'm going to enter that. Oh, and I also want to do read only equals true. So this allows me to do arguments in whatever order happens to be relevant to me. And then here, I could still do things out of order. So I could type password, colon equals, and again, it's going to go over to password. I realize that actually that looks like it is in order. So let's go back and let's type here, password, colon equals, and then let's type password. And then I type a comma, and you can see that as soon as I've typed the comma, the argument that I'm interacting with becomes bold. If I haven't typed read only colon equals, nothing would be bold. So if you were to backspace here, nothing's bold. I type the colon, and as soon as I type the equal sign, read only is going to become bold. And there you have it. So again, that's true, false. So the takeaway I want to give you here is that the VBA help topics are your friend, and on occasion you are totally going to be getting these errors that say that you didn't assign it to anything, the equal sign. And if that's the case, you have two options. One, absolutely, you can go ahead and create an equality and assign the result to something, whether that be that it's being assigned to a string or an object of some kind. Or you can change up your syntax to be able to use this example 2 method to just avoid the object assignment altogether. However, there are going to be cases where you do want to make the object assignment at the same time. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say that I'm creating a worksheet. Now, if I just create a worksheet, I have no idea what Excel calls it, because when I create a worksheet, let's say it's worksheet 6, the next one is going to be worksheet 7, worksheet 8, and worksheet 9. But that's kind of an uncontrolled environment when you think about it, because I would like to just immediately create a worksheet and give it a name instead of letting Excel name it for me. And so one way to do that is to create a worksheet object, dim ws as worksheet. So I can then type set ws equals, and then I'm going to use again the sheets collection and type dot, and I see all of the methods that go with sheets. Again, this little green box that looks like an object that's getting thrown means that it's a method. So I'll type dot add, and then open parentheses. I can decide to add my worksheet before or after another worksheet. Let's say I'm going to use before, and let's say it's going to go before my data. Okay, and then what this allows me to do is then to say worksheet.name, so ws.name equals my new sheet. And let's kind of make this side by side so that you can see the code run and do things. Okay, so kind of look down here when I tell you to. I'm going to be having a worksheet show up and then immediately get renamed. So type F8. It's going to execute the add method on the collection sheets. So now sheet 11 has been created. So how would I know that it's going to be called sheet 11? I mean, yours might be sheet 3 or sheet 4, but I've been working with this workbook for a while, and so it's counted all of the sheets that I've deleted so far and kind of keeps counting upwards. So I have no idea what the next number is going to be unless I've been keeping track. And so instead of trying to figure out what this was called when it came out, I already assigned it to an object. So I can then rename WS as my new sheet. And voila, you now have my new sheet. I can then show you that this worksheet itself has methods that go with it now. So if I wanted to immediately delete that sheet, I can say ws.delete, and that's a method that goes with that worksheet as well. If I run that line of code, I get a message pop up that says, do I want to permanently delete? And I'm going to say yes, and the worksheet is gone. So there's some examples of executing a method assignment that immediately assigns to an object versus executing a method independently so that the result just happens and that we're not immediately making that assignment. And then also a reason why you might actually want to make the assignment right away. For example, keeping track of the object that gets created from the method. And then lastly, we went over how to interact with an individual object instead of a collection. So these were collection methods when we did sheets dot or workbooks dot, but I can always interact with a specific object. All right, thanks for joining, and I hope that that's given you a good grasp of working with methods.